God, I feel like you're meeting capitalist Kathy today instead of liberal Lena. Hello and welcome back to the 20s Toolkit. This is a series where I try and impart things that I wish I had known in my 20s to you, someone who is currently in their 20s. My name's Lena and please don't judge my desk. Does the plant make me look more accomplished or on closer inspection, less accomplished? I am now 30 and I work for myself, but I spent all of my 20s working for other people, like most people do. And to persuade those people to let you work for them, you usually have to have a CV. Curriculum vitae. It's the passport into a world to exchange your labour for bits of paper that only have arbitrary value that you can then potentially exchange at some point in the future for capital. So exciting. But my skepticisms aside, I recognise that they need to be done, and over the years of me working specifically in the UK and specifically in the publishing industry, I have managed people, and because I've managed people, I've often had to hire people. One time fire people, but we're never talking about that story. I've been part of the hiring process and it was definitely illuminating and definitely made me see that I had oftentimes made huge mistakes in the job application process, and I'm here today to try and prevent you from doing the same. Now obviously these are subjective opinions of mine. This list was actually written while I was working at a publishing house doing the hiring process, and I was like talking to my colleagues around me about things that they'd say, and I was writing down things that I was noting about people's CVs. So it is based on real world scenarios and things that I have actually seen when hiring people. But obviously, like with my renting video, I can only really claim that this applies to the UK. And what was cool in my renting video is that people in the comments made this amazing resource for other countries and talked about what it was like in their countries, how the things that I was talking about differed or what the similarities were. So I'd really advise you to pop into the comments, hit Control F and see what people have left and create a kind of reservoir of resources down there if you're interested in how things differ. And I'll also be leaving some links in the description. I also know that there's kind of a discrepancy around how you learn about CVs. Some people learn about them from their parents or like from people in their communities, or they go to a school where they prepare you with a class on how to write CVs, but not everyone gets that. So I hope this in some way goes towards helping you if you haven't had that advice, or that advice is very hazy for you now, or you weren't really sure if that advice was relevant. Here's some of mine. So the first thing you need to know about CVs is that people don't read them. I'm kidding, they do read them, but it's more of a skimming process. So making sure that the information is really clear and easy to find will put your CV at the top of the pile. I actually organise my CV in columns, which is obviously the layout of newspapers and magazines. It's a really easy way for the human eye to process information, but please God, do not make them longer than 2 pages. And especially if you work in a job where you will need skills like being concise, precision, essentialism, like marketing, publicity, social media, I'd really aim for 1 page if you can. In my role, in the stuff that I was hiring for, I'd always side-eye a 2-page CV. So 1 page if you can. If you're thinking about layout, there's a great woman I know in publishing called Ayn who has a really amazing video that includes some advice about layout, so I'm going to leave that below. She works in the UK publishing industry and she has a whole channel with resources about UK publishing, so you should check that out. Incidentally, I also made some videos about my career, so if you're interested in that, I'll link the playlist above. If you have any questions about my publishing career, it's probably in that playlist. And another tip I'd say about the layout of CVs is I am personally a fan of bullet points. Moving on. To that end, it is okay to remove stuff from your CV as you get older. Your CV isn't supposed to contain your whole life story, it's supposed to contain relevant information. And as you get older, I think it's good to use your judgment to work out what is relevant information. A whole host of extracurricular activities you did in your teens is really helpful if you're trying to get onto a university program or you're trying to get in a job where those hobbies are really relevant. But I think an over explanation of all of the hobbies you did and exactly what belt you got in karate doesn't show that you can discern what is relevant experience and what isn't. It's okay to say what your hobbies are. It's always really interesting to hear what people do, but keep that to a couple of sentences or maybe like 1 or 2 things that you mention. Ditto your less recent qualifications. In the UK it would be like GCSEs if you already have A-levels, or perhaps you have a degree or another equivalent of qualification. My personal taste is that really leaving on your last bit of a qualification and the one before is enough, especially if it's something like we can obviously assume that you would have done GCSEs if you have done A-levels. If you're looking for somewhere to shave off some extra dead weight, then that would be a place to look at. Often your first mistake happens before you start writing your CV. Especially if you're coming to an entry-level job, your CV doesn't have to contain lots and lots and lots of experience, but it does have to contain a really solid indication that this is an industry that you want to work in, or this is a role that you have been wanting to work in. And you can't just fabricate that at the point where you open a Word document and start typing. That has to be stuff that you've actually been doing because you actually want to be in an industry. And if you don't, then fudging it is always good, or like, I'm keen about communication, looking for those breadcrumbs throughout the past few years. For example, when I was applying for jobs in publishing, I could say I'm interested in connecting people with the arts because I started my own poetry and music night in my spare time in a really small cafe in Coventry. I actually started a YouTube channel that has like 300 subscribers where I talk about books. On my uni course, I self-published some fiction with some of my friends on my master's course. Other suggestions of things you could have done: I volunteered at a literary event in my town. I published my own zine using only stolen A4 paper from my school and a stapler. If you're writing a little statement at the beginning of your CV and also maybe in your cover letter, I guess that kind of overlaps into that. Please don't write "from a young age I" unless it's actually true, because the people who are reading your CV are also humans and know that they haven't been wanting to do whatever they've wanted to do since they were a child, because most of us wanted to be astronauts, vets, policemen. So for all means, if you actually genuinely wanted to do one of those things and it is a job that a child would understand existed, then go ham. But I'd say in the majority of situations, it would be a very rare 8-year-old that I'd meet and be like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And she'd be like, oh, a marketing manager specialising in social media communications. So anyway, I thought that was a bit of an obvious pitfall, but I still saw it in so many CVs and I was like, come on. Before the age of 8, I wasn't really thinking that authors existed. I just knew that these books just like appeared. And then maybe it was about 15 when I started actually wondering how books were made. So let's calm down on that front. It's okay to have not known what you wanted to do for the whole of your life. And I also think it's kind of a little bit disingenuous because this is a piece of paper presenting what you can bring to the role. I don't want this to sound like really like cutthroat or harsh, but like, the people who are hiring you aren't there to fulfill your childhood dreams. That's not what they're looking to do. As nice as or as kind as they may be, we're not in a socialist utopia yet. Whether you've wanted to do it your whole life is kind of irrelevant. But whether you wanted to do it for the last few years, or if you've always known you've had these skills and then you learnt about this industry and you were really excited that you were finally able to apply these skills, that's a different fish of kettles. Do you know what I mean? I have a video in the 20s Toolkit series all about lies we're told at school, and I think one of them is this emphasis on your central concern being your progress. And a lot of people write CVs like they'd write anything where they're going into an academic field where it is about their progress. But you're playing with the big boys now.
You're playing with the big boys now.
I'm afraid it's not the world we're in. It's the world I wish we were in, but it's not the world we're currently in. Related to this, I love the product you make. Whether I believe that or I don't believe that, depending on whether you're applying to the manufacturer of screwdrivers, which people like screwdrivers, that's the thing. Or you're applying to something where there's a more common passion for it, like books. The fact that you love the thing that a company makes doesn't necessarily push you any higher up as a candidate. There's like a bit of a bitchy part of me that would read CVs like that and be like, oh, you like the books that we publish? Great. That just means that I'll be able to sell you books. You're labeling yourself as a customer. Cool. But what I was looking for was somebody who could apply that love and explain to me in a CV why that is relevant. So what about the way you've noticed you consume that product yourself makes you perfect to specifically shape this role? God, I feel like you're meeting capitalist Kathy today instead of liberal Lena. But she's always contained within me, and she comes out in the names of survival and helping others survive in this crazy capitalist system. But hi, I'm here. I guess that joke only works if you know that my whole name is Kathleen, and sometimes I'm called Kathy and sometimes I'm called Lena. Anyway. This is just a minor detail and it might vary from country to country, but personally, I feel your CV should not be in first person. It sounds weird, it sounds childish, don't do it. Just use business-like language, list your duties. Writing copy like that shouldn't require you to use first person, please, please. Do not be a Joey and use a thesaurus, or as I thought it was called, a thesaurus, which I think sounds way better.
I don't know any big words or anything, so.
Well, why don't you use your thesaurus?
What'd I just say?
Instead of writing your CV and then going over it, looking for synonyms for different words to make you sound more intelligent, what I sometimes do when I have to write more formal copy that isn't really what I'm used to talking like, I will go on the internet and I'll read other people's stuff so I get that kind of tone of voice in my head a bit without copying theirs or like directly transcribing what I've written. So I'll spend like 20 minutes getting in the mood and the headspace of that style of writing, and then sweep it all away and write my own thing. And trust yourself, you will find more formal words for things and ways to phrase things once you're in that mindset, and it will come out in a much more natural way, because you can really tell when somebody has just thesaurused their CV.
They are warm, nice people with big hearts. And that became, they are humid, prepossessing Homo sapiens with full-sized aortic pumps.
If you mention that you make stuff online, whether that's you have an Instagram account where you talk about the thing that's related to your work, or you have a blog or a YouTube channel, or you've helped out at a website, link it. If you mention it but you don't link it, I will assume that it is shit and you don't want me to see it, and that's going to make me seek it out more. I will find it if you mention that you've done it, because that's the kind of petty hiring person that I am. So if you don't want somebody to look it up, just don't mention it. But if you do and you're proud of it, as you should be if you're using it to apply for a job, please name it and link it. Related to that, the next point is, especially if you're applying to a big company, do not hyperlink your CV. I know it feels clever and cool, and I really like hyperlinking my PDFs, but when you're applying for a big company, it's likely uploaded to this like really silly system. They all have them, and the PDF is flattened into just a text file that they see. So often you'll lose a lot of the formatting, or you'll at least lose the hyperlink. So make sure that instead you include a nice, neat URL. If you don't have one for what you make, you can just make a bit.ly link that's custom describing your project. But that's something I didn't realize until I was already in a big company, and I was like, huh, so those hyperlinks never worked, hey? Cool. If you've done previous jobs and they have like very general job titles, those job titles, even if you think it should be obvious what that job entails, those job roles do change from company to company and industry to industry. So including some really short bullet points of what your duties were and what you were responsible for is really, really helpful for a recruiter, and it also helps you look more professional and that you understand your role. You don't have to go into everything like, I was also in charge of ordering office supplies. I was also the informal IT specialist of the office and taught many boomers how to rotate PDFs. That's all stuff that if it's relevant, it will come up in the interview, but just generally, you know what I mean. Give people a hint to what it covers and also how you understand the role. It's very telling to see you explain what you did in that role. Do not put the actual details of your references on your CV. That's something that I didn't know for a long time, but it's something that when I started talking to people after a few years, they were like, yeah, don't do that. And I was like, oh, okay. And I mean, it might be different in different industries, but generally it takes up too much space on your CV. So you're losing valuable space where you could be telling people how cool you are, and also you're sharing personal information of other people that could be circulated around a whole company. So like data protection wise, it's not great to put it on your CV. I always now just put the sentence at the bottom of the page, references available on request. They'll often only want to hear from the references once they've interviewed you and stuff, and then they'll request that information and you can give it to them in a much safer way. But putting it on your CV is kind of like a no-go, which is, I didn't know. How would you know that? That's not why. Anyway, fun fact. And finally, the most uncharacteristic of all of this advice is steer away from colour. It hurts my heart, it does. Creativity is my life. But I've worked in a lot of creative roles, and I've got those roles through having a very clean, neat, uncreative CV. So unless you actually work in an art department, then I think it's really different. You'd have to look for other advice. But if you're just doing something that's like intrinsically creative, there's no need to give your CV a feather boa, if you know what I mean. Yes, it's against the policy of my life, my ethos for the world, but bitch, you gotta eat. I kind of liken it to wearing like a big party ball gown to an interview. It's not that that's morally wrong, it's just that wearing something more plain and smart and streamlined for an interview that's formal in a non-party way shows that you know where you are, that you remember that the interview is happening, that you understand the role. So it's really boring, but keeping your CV like in really simple fonts, not getting too design happy with it. Also because it could go through a system where all of that design work is lost anyway, and your CV comes out looking like it's rolled out of the King's Arms at 6 a.m. a.m. after a very enthusiastic freshers week, that's what you risk doing. I know that you want to stand out, but I think that the contents of your CV will stand out, and also from the majority of the CVs that I've seen, you will stand out if your CV is legible and you follow the following rules above. I always say to people who are really like worried about getting into publishing, because they hear that loads of people apply and it's really hard to get into. I've made a whole video about that up there actually. I always say, like, yes, a high volume of people apply, but the amount of people that are actually eligible for the jobs, who actually do love books and have their heads screwed on straight, you have less competition than you think. So the same with CVs. You can stand out by just doing something thoroughly and well. I also grew up on Legally Blonde and wanted to print out my CV in pink and spray perfume on it.
I think it gives it a little something extra.
But turns out, while I'd love that, again, bitch gotta eat. I hope you enjoyed meeting capitalist Kathy today. Liberal Lena will be back next week. Thank you so much to the Gumption Club for making these videos possible. These videos are free to watch, but they're made because people in the Gumption Club tip me per video to make that happen. So if you'd like to be one of those people, there's a link below where you can find out more about it. This is probably one of my more boring contributions to my 20s toolkit. There's definitely some more interesting ones up there. Function over fun has to happen occasionally, and I really hope for those of you who are looking for goddamn information that you got something useful. If not from what I've said, from the comments below. Thank you so much. Frogsnog out.